Welcome again to the Sound of Safety, sponsored by Sensear, with our special guest, Dr. Keith Darrow. Dr. Darrow, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. And thanks for doing this series, right? I really think with all the data, with everything we know, we have to get the word out about how important it is to prevent hearing loss when possible, especially in occupational settings.
Absolutely. And I know we've learned a lot, and I hope our viewers have as well. And so we're really excited about this as it's our initial attempt here to really try to promote awareness and education, not only with safety professionals, but even more so with end users. As we've discussed in these podcasts before, there's so much more to hearing loss when it comes to quality life and how it impacts each individual worker. So I really have enjoyed the time with you, and I appreciate all the time that you spent with us. And today we're going to shift gears, I think, a little bit and really talk more about life after occupational hearing loss and kind of moving in that next phase within these new parts. In in this specific podcast, I think we're going to back up and really look at, what are some of the statistics that in different regions today? What are some of the challenges? How do we go and collaborate more with safety professionals? What things can we do to really kind of increase that awareness? And then, as a result, if we don't do these things, what's the impact after the workplace? A recent article in the American Journal of Industrial Medicine revealed that globally, 16% of disabling hearing loss in adults results in over 4 million years of life lost due to premature mortality. And that's crazy. The European Union reports that 7% of employees experience work-related difficulties, making noise-induced hearing loss the most prevalent occupational disease in the European Union. And when you look at the United States, we're significantly more than that. And so we have a long way to go. And so, Dr. Darrow, I'd like to start off with, when you look at the patients that are walking through your door today and throughout your career, what are the average age of people that you're walking in? And has it changed over time? Are we seeing it, occupational hearing loss occur earlier? Are we seeing people seeking out treatment early? Has it really changed over the course of your practice and what you've seen?
Yes, absolutely, right? And I think there's a number of factors, right? So I would say when I started in hearing healthcare a little over 20 years ago, the average patient was definitely north of 70.
Mhm.
And that number over the last 20 years has come down. Again, it's an average in the say between 60 and 62, right? Which for me is I don't know. I guess the pros and cons, right? I think because we're getting out the education, like look, I'm not trying to imply that all of that is because of noise exposure. I think a lot of it has to do with, for example, this podcast. I think a lot has to do with public awareness and public education when it comes to hearing loss. Like genuinely, when I went through all of my schooling, it's as if hearing loss was almost taught to us as elective, as if, well, yes, it will erode your quality of life.
Mhm.
And as if it did nothing else, right? Whereas in the last 20 years, we've learned everything from premature death. You just brought that up. I mean, I often joke, half joke with people. There's nothing worse than that, right? Find me something worse than premature death. Yet hearing loss is linked to that. And I know the article that you're talking about,
Mhm.
but in the Journal of the American Medical Association, in JAMA, an article, we're early in 2024, a new article just came out again, linking hearing loss to premature death. Like this isn't that new. There's been a few articles on this. I love the fact that now I see it all over social media. More people are talking about it again because of advocacy to help people live their best life, prevent dementia, maintain their independence.
I mean, you're talking about the article being in the Journal of Medicine. How does that translate to safety professionals? I have a question here further down, but I think I'm going to get to it right now because I think it flows really well to what we're speaking to right now. Is that, when you look at social media, a lot of the information is coming from medical professionals. How is there a need to really bridge that gap between what audiologists and our medical industry is seeing as the aftermath with the safety professionals that are responsible for, doing that initial education and monitoring? Is there opportunity here for, that bridge to help have an impact?
Oh, there's a tremendous opportunity. And I think that, you know, perhaps we're starting to reverse this course, whereas there used to be, and there still is, and there's a need for specialties, right? That way you get to understand whatever the topic is at a deeper level. But sometimes I feel like for a while we were really living in our own silos where the audiologist wasn't having as open of a conversation with the medical doctors. The audiologist wasn't having as open as a conversation with the occupational safety experts. Nowadays, you see this starting to come together. You start to see, whether it be government, occupation, the topic is certainly more top of mind. And I think that probably has to do with our society has finally said, okay, we've doubled the human lifespan in the last 120 years. Now, let's make the most of those extra 20 to 30 years. And so we're realizing that untreated hearing loss really holds you back from enjoying life and experiencing life in those last 20 to 30 years.
So with that, I mean, you said, the average age is dropping down, but it still seems like, from a public awareness standpoint, I mean, when you look at, highly funded, publicized issues such as cancer, Alzheimer's, dementia, several things out there, this almost seems like the silent killer in our society, that it's just under the radar. It doesn't get the publicity and awareness. Are you seeing more awareness of those patients coming in today? And where have you seen that change in how they're getting the information? Is it social media? But what has significantly changed? Because it still seems, with it being so underfunded and still under publicized versus some of the healthcare issues that we see in this industry or in this
Well,
environment.
it's definitely starting to make its mark, right? So the lab I worked at, I'll give you an example. The lab that I worked at for 10 to 15 years, dear colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Stefan Maison at Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary at Harvard University Hospital, he just uncovered what many of us sort of instinctively knew, but he put out this amazing article just a month or two ago, really sort of definitively putting the stamp, the verdict on, yes, tinnitus, that ringing in your ears, is a result of damage to the neural structures that really sort of hold the ear and brain together. And that's why, especially, your audience where there's occupational noise exposure, tinnitus is running rampant. And so this article came out, and I was talking to him recently. This article has been published all over the world. It was picked up by nearly every major news station, including in communist North Korea, right? Like, so I actually feel like society is moving in a direction where we're finally, the medical field is opening the door to, hey, hearing loss is not just, the annoying little step kid or, the annoying little brother. It's actually really plays a significant role in life, quality of life, and, length of life.
Hmm. But are we still seeing, with those that are impacted with occupational hearing loss, are we still only seeing the awareness come when there's a problem? Or do you feel like it's
Yes. Yes, that is definitely where, and I don't really blame the end user. As a society, we tend to take our healthcare in a reactive, we take a reactive approach to our healthcare, right? Whereas hearing healthcare is preventative medicine. If we could start treating hearing healthcare, if we can start treating hearing loss and tinnitus at the first signs, we now know that we can avoid many of these dire consequences that we talk about in these episodes. And so the awareness is coming about, but still, you need an entire societal shift to say, hey, let's approach this from a proactive rather than a reactive.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you see these patients coming out, I think, we said, with these two last episodes, we're really going to focus on life after hearing loss. So, I mean, when you have someone that has already experienced occupational hearing loss and now they're retired and they're removed from this industry, does the progression of it slow down? What happens to the progression then once the worker is actually removed from that environment?
So that's an amazing question. And a lot of people tend to think that. And here's my analogy. Hopefully we've all been to the dermatologist, especially those of us who perhaps live on the coast, spent maybe too much time when we were younger at a beach and tanning. And instead of using sunblock, we used oil, right? So the dermatologist will tell you it's not the sun exposure from last summer or even the summer before that. It's all that sun exposure that started when you were younger and accumulated over the years. That's what caused the damage. It's not the sun in the last 5 years. It was the sun exposure. And so really the same principles apply to noise exposure. In fact, there have been studies that are done that just show one single noise exposure, one exposure to one very loud concert can actually take the aging process, right? So instead of getting hearing loss at 70 to 75, just one loud exposure as a teenager can make that hearing loss start anywhere from 10 to 15 years earlier. I hate to say it, but it's a good thing that you're out of noise, but the damage is done.
So is the progression slower or is it basically come to a halt? I mean, how does
No,
that
no, no,
slow
no, no.
up?
The progression continues. And that's a great word, right? Because the medical definition of this type of hearing loss, it falls into the category of a progressive degenerative disorder. Not all that different from diabetes, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, wherein it will continue to progress over time.
Mhm.
And it's degenerative because it's breaking down the neural connections, not only in the ear, but more importantly, in the brain. And your only bet at slowing it down is treatment, right? You can't stop the train. It has left the terminal. But your hope and what studies have shown us for 30 years is that if you treat hearing loss, it will slow the progression down.
So how important is it? I mean, how much would you emphasize to safety professionals and new workers that are going to be in this environment to get testing as soon as possible? And, what other things should they really be focused on to set themselves up so that, at retirement age, we're not faced with a situation that obviously is not reversible?
Yeah, I mean, dare I say, if you're going to work in a noisy environment, you need a rainy day fund, right? You almost need to talk to your bank or your financial advisor and put some money aside because this is going to happen. And I know this might upset a number of people, but the current testing that we have in place to measure occupational noise and how it damages the ear is not sensitive enough. See, that really is the problem. See, right now, the primary means of measuring somebody's hearing is raise your hand. Raise your hand when you hear a beep. You remember that from grade school. It is still the primary means of determining if somebody does or doesn't have hearing loss. When in fact, there are way more sensitive tests and really good occupational audiologists will use this equipment that can actually study the cells in the ear and see that they're beginning to be damaged because that damage will actually show up 20 years before you don't raise your hand anymore, right? And so you've got to have the right testing. And I feel like you just have to sort of expect if you're going to work in this noisy environment, you do have to plan ahead. And dare I say, the insurance companies, the employees, they're the ones, or employers, they're the ones that really should be planning ahead.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think we've hit on that before. I mean, just the
Yeah.
term health cost and coverage and workers' comp, and also the safety issues that come with progressive hearing loss as a worker goes throughout their career. So, absolutely. So, you know, maybe expand a little bit more about the technology that you use as an audiologist compared to what you see in the industrial world today and how those differ.
Yeah. So look, I don't want to put anybody to sleep with science. So I'll make this really as easy as possible. If you take all of the connections that connect the ear to the brain, and let's just say you got 100%, you got 100% of neural connections. Here's over the last 20 to 30 years, a number of different studies have shown that it takes minimum neural activity to actually be able to respond to a basic beep, right? So you can actually lose up to like 80% of the ear to brain connections and still be able to respond to a beep. What actually is happening in response to noise, it's not about hearing a beep. What happens is the neural connections start to die away. And it's not, here's the deal, it's not a hearing loss at first, it's actually a listening loss. And so a lot of people in my field, we talk more about listening disorders than a hearing loss because everybody thinks a hearing loss is just, oh, do you or don't you hear the beeps, as compared to how well can you follow a conversation in background noise? Can your brain differentiate what you want to hear from what you don't want to hear? Can you, you know, can you attend to certain auditory tasks? All of those things become way more difficult. And look, again, this is, as far as I know, I've never seen it done in an occupational setting. Wherein what we do at our clinic is we actually measure the brain's ability to listen to and attend to sound. That helps us catch, again, hearing loss much earlier. It allows us to start treating the patient much earlier. So there's just one test. It's basically called a speech and noise test. That's one way to determine if somebody has difficulty hearing and if they need treatment. Another one, as I was saying, is it's called these otoacoustic emissions, right? Which is basically you send a sound into the ear and you wait for an echo to come back out. Well, an ear that's been damaged by noise, the echo won't come back out. And if we did that test on everybody who was exposed to noise, as soon as you went from, yes, there's an echo, to there's no more echo, that person should be instantly taken out of noise exposure because, again, the damage is already done,
Right.
but you could save potential future damage. But we're not. We're waiting till it's too late.
So it sounds like, I mean, with the testing that you're talking about today, it goes one step beyond just whether I can hear or not. And it really starts getting down to what a person's cognitive ability and what the impact of that hearing loss has had on that cognitive ability. Is that correct?
Exactly. Thank you for really sort of simplifying that, because hearing, I often joke with my students. I'll say, hey, what do we hear with? And they all just sort of look at me and they're like, our ears. No, it's our brain, right? Because the brain is where all the processing comes together. We're listening and understanding. And when you damage the ear, the brain really suffers and cannot understand, cannot follow a conversation. So these should be the defining features of whether or not a person has damage, has hearing loss, not raise your hand when you hear a silly little beep.
Right. I mean, and I think that feeds in so well to the other conversations that we've had here. I mean, without truly understanding that cognitive deterioration over time, because we've talked about, how that impacts decision making, processing information, just overall communication. And when you're working in these hazardous environments, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, hearing a beep versus being able to react quickly and make a decision is night and day here. So, I mean, I really appreciate you
Absolutely.
bringing that.
And here's the deal, right? Ultimately, and I'm not trying to lay blame. Ultimately, the big corporations, insurance companies, are going to follow the current legislation, right? Whatever regulations is a better word. Whatever the regulations are, and if the regulations are, let's see if they can respond to a beep, well, then that's what they're going to do. And so I do think a lot of responsibility, I'm sorry to say it, does fall on the end user, does fall on the employee to be more proactive. So even if you are in a work environment, like I'm speaking directly to you, the person who works in a noisy environment, if you work there, even if you get your hearing tested every year, I I I beg of you to also go see a certified audiologist who can put you through a much more rigorous evaluation, right? They can actually measure how hearing is impacting your brain, how hearing is impacting your clarity. They can see if the cells in your ears are damaged or not. They do so much more. We have an entire network, the Excellence in Audiology Network, that's nationwide, that you can easily access.
Well, and I think that's one of the things when you look at, you know, Europe and other regions versus the United States, is that not only the regulatory impact, but there also seems to be more awareness around the health impact and pushing the technology. And I think going above the regulations, where here in North America, we often hear, well, we met the regulations. That's
Exactly.
and and again, I think it's education, I think it's awareness. And so we've already talked about how far the regulations are lagging versus the research. I mean, we're 30, 40 years or more behind when it comes to that. And so until those regulations really catch up, I think you're absolutely right. It falls on that end user to take the ownership of it, because I mean, that's gonna be the driver. Until we get more regulations that drive more significant changes in how occupational hazard or occupational hearing loss is occurring in North America, end users are going to have to take that ownership and seek information and really, look for those solutions that are right for them, realizing the long-term impacts that it's gonna have, because ultimately, they're the ones that are impacted. And
Exactly.
and
They're the ones who will suffer. They're the ones who will have to lay in bed at night and hear that roaring tinnitus. They're the ones who are potentially at risk for dementia. They're the ones who may fall because of their hearing loss and lose their independence, right? Like, again, I'm not trying to shift responsibility, but until we talked about this on the first episode, until we figure out how to move mountains, like government, like regulation, like OSHA, right now it does fall into the hands of the end user. It is their responsibility.
and I think this feeds really well into what our next segment is going to be. So thank you, Dr. Darrow, for joining us today. In our next episode, we're really going to be focusing on, some real life cases, in my experience, that peer-to-peer awareness of someone that has walked in their shoes and what the results have been for them is so much more impactful. As manufacturers, as a medical community, we can preach to the end of the day, but I think sometimes when you're only faced with looking at what your future might be through the eyes of someone else, can you really realize the impact of your choices early on in life? So I thank you a lot, and that's a wrap. So thank you today for joining us, and I encourage all of our viewers to post your suggestions. What are you seeing that's working in your workplace? If you have some best practices that you've really seen drive improvements, share them. We want to hear about them so that we can continue to educate others in the industry. Thank you so much.
Thank you.